for me. Blood in my dog and I can't see. I'm trying to be what I'm destined to be. And niggas trying to take my life away. I put a hole in a nigga for fuck.
What's up, YouTube? Time to get back on the Chaser and knock a few things off the list that need to be done before I can swap it. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of all the ABS stuff and all the brake lines in the engine bay. I went ahead and ordered a kit online, so it'll replace everything from both front wheels to the brake master, and then it'll connect to the line that goes to the rear brakes. So all these lines and the ABS stuff can go away. So I'm gonna do that right now. And then also, I know in the last video I said I was gonna do it in stages and not really touch the suspension and all that. But I do need to get the rear subframe out. And the reason why is because I was at Excessive Manufacturing. If you don't know, it's a JZ specialist machine shop that makes a lot of tools, angle kits, adapters, all kinds of stuff for a lot of chassis, but they specialize in JZ stuff. And they're local. So when I was there yesterday, shooting the shit a little bit at work and talking to them about this project, they do want to start producing a rear subframe reinforcement kit, as well as the little metal ring that goes into the GX subframe to accept the third mount point for the rear diff. The JZXs have them, the GXs do not. Excessive already sells all the bushings and control arms and stuff like that, but they don't have the reinforcement kit and the weld-in ring for that bushing. So I know that's going to take some time for them to do all that. So I'm going to go ahead and yank this rear subframe out and take it down to Excessive tomorrow. So that way they can keep it for a little while to do all that stuff. And I don't know if that means I'm gonna go ahead and swap the brakes and the coilovers and stuff now, because I'm gonna have the subframe out. I probably will. Probably won't be in this video, but that probably means I won't be putting the rear subframe back in without upgrading the brakes and suspension in the back and in the front, because I'm not just gonna do half the car. So yeah, time to get started. I'm gonna yank the front brakes stuff out, and then I'm gonna get on the rear subframe removal. All right, I got the ABS block out. Got the harness all zip tied up out of the way. Got all the brake lines out. Also went ahead and removed the charcoal canister that was in here and the lines for that. Yeah, really starting to look nice and clean. I'm also letting the fuel lines drain out into that bucket, and the brake master drain off into that bucket. I purposefully drove the car the last few days before I put it on the lift to make sure there wasn't very much gas in it, because with the 2J, obviously I'm gonna want to run super, and this had regular in it, so it shouldn't be draining very much. So now that the engine bay is pretty much ready to just be cleaned, I'm gonna move on to the rear end. You can see I got the exhaust off. And here's what the GX rear subframe looks like. So normally there's a metal ring here and another bushing, even though this diff cover has a mount right there. There's no bushing. So there's also a few spots on it where it likes to crack when you put a lot of power to these. So I got to get the diff out, take the rest of the drive line out, and undo the control arms and everything and the rear struts, so then I can drop the subframe. I've got the diff out, and then I went ahead and sprayed all the control arms with WD-40 and the brake line connections, and also the subframe bolts. So now I can, and I also got the axle nuts off, and I went ahead and sprayed those, so hopefully they'll slide out easier. So now that the diff's out, I can remove the axles completely, and then I can start unbolting all the control arms and then take the subframe out. Got the e-brake cables dropped down so they can loop around the subframe when I drop it. Got all the control arms disconnected, hanging by the strut. think it's going to be easiest to do it this way, so then I can leave all this assembly in place. And now I should be able to take all these bolts off and the two big front bolts. And this rear subframe is coming out. Well, subframe's out. Diff is out. Man, if I just did everything at once, the interior conversion parts, the suspension, everything, there's not much left of this car. Pretty much a shell. Sure is nice to see a clean chassis though. Good platform to build. All right, so I made it to my buddy's house to pick up the American 2J. And you guys know who he is? It is Shane. So let me show you the car. I'm going to be yanking this motor out and give you some history on why and how I got this motor. Here's his FD that he's doing a full build on with the Ecotech swap. You can check that out in previous videos, and I do need to do an update on that soon. But here's the donor vehicle. So this is a Chevy Vortec 4200 inline 6. Some people call it the Atlas motor. I was actually over here the other day and went ahead and took all this stuff, took the radiator and everything out and cleaned up both sides. So pretty much all I have left to do is the bell housing bolts, I think the drive shafts, and yeah, and just some more little things that I need to get out of the way so I can yank it out. This was his dad's daily driver for a long time, and it was actually really nice and clean. But as you can see, it caught on fire. So now we are using it for a recycling can. Here's Nate's LS motor, and then a bunch of metal scrap. This is actually the exhaust off the Chaser I brought over the other day. And I have a whole bunch more metal scrap to throw in here, so when he takes it to the scrap yard, it'll be nice and heavy for him. If you know anything about this Vortec 4200 Atlas motor, there's a guy in the Midwest that's trying to put it in an S13, doesn't really fit. Micah Diaz, the FD driver, he's been doing a couple YouTube videos on how good this motor is.
Yeah. Did you bring us a baby?
Sylvia.
This is a sign why we need another baby.
What'd she bring in here?
A baby. It's just
She
a
was
baby.
in here sleeping, and the bunny was sleeping right next to her
I'm
on the
so
bed.
scared.
Sylvia, what'd you bring us?
Oh, that's a nice kitty. I like baby bunnies.
Kind of wish I would have just bought one for 300 bucks on a pallet, because these things are a biatch. But motor's out. A few days later. Obviously I didn't spend all day here any of those days, but it's still a real pain. We'll just call it the Atlas motor. Got it home. Now I can show it to you and start stripping it down to get it ready to test fit. So here's the motor. You can see it is a very big motor. I already yanked the AC compressor off and the belt. Well, that's what she looks like. The throttle body's disconnected, but right now I'm gonna take the wiring harness off. But you can see this is already a fitment problem that most people talk about online. And you can see how high the intake manifold is above that. So I think I might as well just take the manifold off before I even put it in the car. And then if it looks like I'll have plenty of room to clear this, then maybe I'll just bolt it back on in the car. Other thing is gonna be the oil pan, which we already pretty much figured was gonna be a problem. So I think before I even test fit it, instead of putting it in and out for no reason, just to see that it doesn't fit, I'm gonna go ahead, after I'm done stripping it down a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and just yank the pan off. And then my plan is to put something on the steering rack and front cross member, and then try to set the motor in on that spacer. So right now I'm gonna start with a little bit of a tear down. Wiring harness got to come off. Intake manifold got to come off. Atlas motor stripped down a little bit. It doesn't look quite so big and overwhelming once you take the intake manifold and harness off. So this is pretty much just with the necessary components. You got the power steering pump, you got the factory exhaust manifold. Don't know if that would be usable, but and that's pretty much it on this side. So you can see the motor's not going to be super wide on this side at all. And then on this side, you've got the alternator. This bracket will go away. You got the alternator and some pulleys. And then the intake manifold is off. So there's the factory fuel rail, nice and tucked in there. And the injectors are still in there, and you got the starter. Now there are companies out there that make fabricated forward-facing intake manifolds if the factory one won't work. But my goal is to not worry about the intake manifold. My goal is to worry about if this thing will even fit in the car very well. Here's a side-by-side comparison with the 2J. So this is the 2J that I actually have to go in this car. You can see I've already got the turbo manifold and turbo hooked up with the turbo lines, and then I kind of started to mock up some downpipe stuff. Got the wastegate on. Accessories are on. No AC. Shane did modify the OEM intake manifold to fit this throttle body. So that's already done and ready to go. And I pretty much have everything to do the swap already laying around the shop. So let's pull some measurements and just get an idea of how these two stack up to each other as far as size. So let's start with the front of the motor and see what the clearance looks like. Assuming that I'm gonna have to make a custom oil pan for that, I'm just gonna go from the bottom of the block up on both of these. So the bottom of the block. So it's 1.25 inches lower than that. I got about 19 to there. So that means it's 20.25. Now we'll do the bottom of this block to the top of here. I'm not going to measure to the top of the oil cap because this can be shaved. About 21.25 plus the 1/4 inch, so 21.5. So it's about 1 inch taller in clearance to the front of here. So that's not too bad. That's actually good news, minus the oil cap. So the other question is going to be, how long is it? And the front of the accessories, I'm going to say are about 28.5. And let's see what the Atlas is. Well, that pulley there sticks out, but everything else is right about 30. So about 1.5 inches longer than the 2J. So we got about 1 inch taller, 1.5 inches longer. That's not too bad. Some of you guys are asking, what's the whole purpose of this? And why am I even doing this? Well, a few reasons. I have a Mark II outside that was cheap, and I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with it yet. So putting together a affordable swap, not only for myself, but for other people to consider doing, is a great idea. It's always a good idea. The other reason is that this motor is like the new version of the LS. The LS 5.3s used to be a couple $100 in all the junkyards around the country. Now these are a couple $100 in all the junkyards around the country. So they're super cheap, easy to get. The other reason is because this motor has 4.2 liters of displacement from the factory. So even NA, and leaving it simple with a factory exhaust if you want, in stock form, this makes almost the same amount of power as the 1JZ VVTi turbo motor that comes in a JZX100. If this swap is affordable and becomes pretty easy to do, it might not make sense to spend an extra $15,000 on a JZX100 when you can buy a nice clean GX100 and do an Atlas swap and have the same amount of power, NA, and then if you want to throw a boost at it down the road, these things are known to hold 800 horsepower in stock form. And I know some people are going to say, well, there's a lot of differences between the JZX and the GX chassis besides just the drivetrain. And yeah, I know. I've had plenty of JZXs and plenty of GXs, and I've built both of them. The only problem I have with that argument is 99% of the things that you would upgrade on a JZX100 that you import from Japan, aside from the drivetrain itself, but the rear subframe reinforcement, the rear diff swap to put in something that's easy to get for axles and everything in the US, all the bushings, all that stuff you're gonna swap out on a JZX anyways. So it doesn't really, the argument doesn't really pan out anymore when you factor in getting a JZX for a lot more money. And besides the drivetrain, you're upgrading and swapping all those other parts already on the JZX, just like you would have to do on a GX. So my goal here is to see if this Atlas swap can be an alternative, affordable swap for the X100 GX chassis, so people will have more motivation to import these GXs for a really affordable price and still have options that are affordable to do a nice inline six swap that makes good power. I just brought the Atlas motor out and gave it a nice pressure wash to clean it up. But one of the things I forgot to mention is that not only is it 4.2 liters of displacement, but it's also all aluminum block and head. So quite a bit lighter than the 2JZ and 1JZ. Cleaned up really nicely. Me and Kai are playing some baseball practice. And here comes the girls. What's up? You guys have fun at the mall?
Yeah.
You look pretty cool in this thing.
Too bad we only went about 10 miles an hour going.
How come? Because of traffic?
Yeah, traffic was there was a little BMW gang on the freeway, so that was kind of fun.
So I got the oil pan off, and when I was referring to making room for the oil pickup, I was actually wrong because I was watching videos online about people making custom pans for these swaps, and they were converting them to rear sump. So I don't have to worry about the pickup at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this pickup tube off, put it in the pan, and then since I don't have to worry about anything back here besides the girdle itself, I should be more than good enough to just set the 2x4 on here. That'll give me room to clear the girdle with the steering rack, and should be enough space to put some sort of oil pan in between that space. But I'll know better when I can lift it up on the lift and look at it from the bottom. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and take the pickup tube off, and then let's see about setting this guy in there. All right, I got the Atlas motor in the Chaser. To be honest, it looks pretty sick in there. Got tons of room on this side, for the alternator. We got tons of room on this side. Gonna be easy to clear the downpipe for the steering rack. That wouldn't be a problem. Engine mounts would be kind of interesting. If I wanted to use the factory subframe mount, I'd have to make pretty extravagant bracket to go from there to there, or I'd have to go straight to the frame rail. So we are still that far from the firewall because I left the mount on the engine that goes to the engine stand because I figured that would be a good spacer so that I know I have room for the bell housing for a transmission. So you can see you got about that much room. I don't know, it looks like it's doable. I've got a 2x4 sitting on the subframe right now, and then I've got a 2x4 sitting on the sway bar. Let's see how much hood clearance we've got. Not super good. The front of these engines has a huge cam gear on both sides. So it's not like you can just cut this down in half. That would be nice. But if you take that off, there is a very large gear that takes up most of that space. Let's see what she looks like from the bottom now. Going underneath the car, you can see there's plenty of room for a front sump. And there's plenty of room right where the oil pickup tube originally was. That 2x4 might also be too much clearance. I think I need to put something smaller in there. But the other option too is I can space this down. So the front cross member I can space down, you know, maybe put a 3/4 inch spacer there, and that'll give me 3/4 of an inch overall further down. Yeah, got some thinking to do. Well, I think the conclusion is gonna be that this is worth giving a shot. For budget reasons, I'd really like to make it work with the OEM intake manifold, even though it's ugly how it crosses over. I think if I can space everything down enough to clear this by the hood, then I think that'll give me enough clearance in the middle of the motor for the throttle body and the OEM intake manifold. And then worst case scenario, if it's touching a little, then I'll just have to order the Origin Type 2 hood, just like I have to clear the VQ in my S13. You can see, may not seem like a lot, but that gives you a ton of room on the inside of the fiberglass. So yeah, not quite sure what my next step is going to be. I got a busy weekend coming up. I got my son has baseball, and I sold my truck today, so I got to do some truck shopping. Shane's on vacation. I'll probably have him stop by, take a look at this, and tell me what he thinks. Because the nice thing is I think that if I buy a 2-wheel drive oil pan brand new, I think we might be able to just cut the sump down and then raise the top, and then raise the section a little bit where it goes over the cross member. Doesn't seem too hard to me, but Shane's the one that would probably do that work. Then I can go ahead and order the 2005 Colorado AR5 transmission. And then when this project's done, I could pull the Mark II in, yank that drivetrain out, and this thing would be pretty much ready to slap in. One of the other cool things, if I were to use the OEM intake manifold that crosses over to this side is that I can probably keep the OEM air box on the Mark II right here, and then just make a pipe that connects those two pieces. And then it would all look really nice and stock and clean. The power steering reservoir is already mounted to the Atlas motor, so I don't have to worry about locating that or doing any of that. Nice, easy for lines, go into the rack, and then I can put a cooler up front. Water line's pretty simple. You got a guy there, that'll go there. And then a guy there, that'll go there. So that's pretty simple. I'm pretty sure for an LS motor too, I can probably buy a custom cap that is very, very thin. And then that way this wouldn't stick up so high. Pretty sure I've seen those on like show cars and stuff. It's just like a billet piece that, you know, just barely sticks up off of this. I could probably get some sort of cap that is maybe inverted. Maybe has like an Allen key on the top. So when I put it on, it's actually flush, and then I can use a tool to actually get it off. I also need to do some research and find out which belt to get for no AC. And even though this isn't the final resting position, there's plenty of room for the OEM X100 radiator and maybe even a Taurus fan. But if not, definitely some nice slim fans to go on the radiator. Should be plenty of room for that. On this side, if I did decide to go with a forward-facing intake manifold, I do think this might be in the way because I've seen pictures of the nice forward-facing manifolds and they tend to throw the throttle body way out here to get around the alternator. So that might be an issue if I go with a forward-facing setup, which also makes me think just trying to make the hood clear the OEM intake manifold would just be a much simpler way to go. I don't know if I'm more excited about doing this in the Mark II or doing the 2J in here. I think they're both going to be fun. Pretty sure even if I did the forward-facing manifold and it was able to fit right here, I could still have the battery here and just maybe run a pipe right over the alternator with a cone filter right here. It'd probably still be okay. And then that would just leave a big space on this side if I did that, which could eventually be more room, you know, for turbo stuff in the future, because they do make turbo manifolds for this motor already. Well, I think I'm going to end this video here. Drop a comment and let me know what you guys think about the Atlas swap and the X100 chassis. So stay tuned for more content. Hopefully I'll have a park permit update coming soon. Or the next video might be finally putting the 2J into this Chaser. Peace.